Just one day after clashing with Black Lives Matter protesters at a rally in Philadelphia, former President Bill Clinton is speaking out now about perhaps how his exchange went, or maybe not so well.
I like and believe in protest. I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't, because I engaged in some when I was a kid. But I never thought I should drown anybody else out. And I confess, maybe it's just a sign of old age, but it bothers me now when that happens. So I did something yesterday in Philadelphia I almost want to apologize for, but I want to use it as an example of the danger threatening our country. We all have different experiences. We cannot learn anything unless we listen. And we are all, just as I was yesterday, vulnerable to getting to some point where somebody says something, I don't want to listen to this anymore.
Well, here's a reminder of what happened at the rally when protesters heckled President Clinton about that crime bill from 1994 that he signed into law. They also took issue with a speech 2 years later in which Hillary Clinton referred to some youthful offenders as super predators.
Oh! Now, wait a minute. Now you're screaming. So let's do another one. I don't know how you would characterize the gang leaders who got 13-year-old kids hopped up on crack and sent them out onto the street to murder other African-American children. Maybe you thought they were good citizens. She didn't. She didn't. You are defending the people who kill the lives you say matter.
Let's chat. I'm joined now with CNN political commentator Marc Lamont and Heather McDonald, a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. She is also the author of Are Cops Racist? So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Marc, to you first, do you think President Clinton should apologize?
Well, apologies imply a level of contrition, and if he doesn't feel that he did anything for which to apologize, I don't want him to be dishonest. I do think that he was wrong, though. I think the way he engaged the protesters yesterday was inappropriate. I think the fact that he marshaled in evidence that was simply inaccurate and empirically unverifiable, in fact, it's been contradicted, I think is troublesome. And the fact that he essentially did another sleight of hand here, where he comes in and makes us think somehow now that the protesters are the problem and that they're endorsing the killing of 13-year-old kids or calling them good citizens. None of that was the truth. The truth is Hillary Clinton made a bad choice. Bill Clinton signed bad legislation, and now they have to be accountable for it.
And so, Heather, on the flip side, you believe that Bill Clinton wasn't wrong, right?
I think the most radical thing that he said yesterday was to point out that it was the African American community who asked him to sign the 1994 crime control bill because their kids were getting shot by gangs and 13-year-olds were planning for their funerals. There is a need to recognize the truth that there are many people within the inner city community who support the police, who want the criminals off the streets, and that the policing revolution of the 1990s, coupled with longer sentences for violent felons, has saved over 100,000 black lives since 1994, had the crime levels been at their same rates. And that it is overwhelmingly inner city neighborhoods.
Can I ask you a question about?
Sure, Marc.
Can I ask you a question about that? On what basis do you say that that was responsible for the drop? I understand that there was a drop, but on what scientific basis do you make that claim?
Because nothing else changed radically to explain why crime went down. There was a policing revolution that began in New York City, where the police started targeting hot spots, using data obsessively and holding commanders accountable. Nothing else changed in New York. Our poverty levels remained the same, drug use remained the same, income inequality remained the same, and yet we experienced an 85% drop in felony crime, the largest in the country and the most sustained.
Let me jump in because I have other numbers. Listen, hang on. I promise I'll get there, but just to another point on numbers, an equal justice attorney says America's jail and prison population jumped from 300,000 to 2.3 million over the past 4 decades, and you know that President Clinton would have had, as president, a role in this. So, Heather, wouldn't the protesters be justified in calling out Bill Clinton?
No, they wouldn't. Prison remains a lifetime achievement award for persistence in criminal offending. Only 3% of violent crimes and property crimes actually end up with the offender in prison. A third of convicted felons end up in prison. Most are given community sentences or jail time. You have to work very hard to get in prison. The overwhelming number of people in prison today are there for violent crimes, and that is the people we need to get off the streets that are preying on innocent, hardworking, the majority of people in minority communities who just want to enjoy the same freedom from fear as everybody else in the country enjoys.
Go ahead, Marc.
Can I respond to some of this stuff now? Okay, so first, you marshaled in evidence from New York to speak to a national number, which is imprecise. The other thing is, if you look at other places like California, Michigan, other states in the 80s and 90s that did not use the same policing tactics as New York did, the numbers went down as well. So it's not true to say that it's purely that. The other piece of what you said is that there was no other factor that contributed to the drop in crime. Again, that is empirically untrue. One of the major contributors, based on every criminological study, every sociologist of crime that's talked about this for the last 10 years has pointed out things like the drop in lead paint, leaded gasoline. These are things that affected a generation of people that made those so-called super predators that you're talking about. That was gone by the time the crime bill was introduced. And so what you saw was a generation of people that were not engaged in the same kind of structural problem. Another thing that affected this was the economy and access to jobs during the 90s and early 2000s. That also led to a drop in crime. So to suggest that aggressive policing fixes this is not the point. But beyond that, what you also make is a straw argument. Nobody on the left is suggesting that we want crime. Nobody on the left, nobody who's criticizing the Clintons is suggesting that people in the black community didn't want some form of redress to the problems that were happening. But to over-police, to over-criminalize, and to create three strikes legislation and a crime bill that over-criminalized people was not the solution. There are many more things like community-based policing, like access to jobs, like early childhood education, like Head Start programs, like access to health care, housing, food, clothing, shelter. All that stuff actually makes crime go down too, not just heavily policing people and not over-incarcerating people. And so when the Clintons signed this bill, you're right, black people asked for it and black people endorsed it. The Congressional Black Caucus was also on board. But just because a bunch of black people do it doesn't make it right. The black people were wrong, the Clintons were wrong, and Hillary was wise to say she was wrong about this. Bill Clinton now is giving the ultimate bad boyfriend apology by saying, yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. I'm sorry your feelings were hurt. I'm sorry you misunderstood what I said, but I'm not really wrong. But I'll say sorry anyway. And that's why people are frustrated today.
All right, Heather. I listened to Marc on all those different points. I want you to respond to all that.
Well, crime continued to drop during the 2008 recession. Crime actually has very little to do with economic conditions. It was spiraling up in the 1960s as our economy was booming at probably one of its most vigorous rates. Crime is a problem overwhelmingly of family breakdown, and until we can rebuild the family, the police are the second best defense. And the fact is that New York's crime rate dropped twice as much as any place else. And of course, the police have to behave constitutionally, they have to behave courteously, they have to treat everybody with respect. But I cannot go to a police community meeting in poor neighborhoods, whether it's in central Brooklyn or south central Los Angeles, where I don't hear those law-abiding people say, I want more policing. I want the dealers off the corners. You arrest them and they're back the next day. I want the kids off my stoop who are smoking pot. I'm scared to go down and get my mail because of the people loitering and trespassing there. Those are the voices that are not heard in the public debate. And I think part of Bill Clinton's frustration yesterday was the sense that, well, of course black people want lowered crime, but where are the protests when dozens of children are gunned down in drive-by shootings? I don't think many people know the name of Marcus Johnson, a 6-year-old who was shot in a drive-by in March of last year as protesters were convening in Ferguson demanding the resignation of the entire department. Nobody knows the names of the 3 children under the age of 5 who were killed in drive-bys in Cleveland in September. There needs to be some balance. Yes, of course, let's bring attention to any police abuses, but if we could spend 1/10 of that attention talking about how to bring crime down in inner city neighborhoods, above all by rebuilding the family, the discussion about policing is going to go nowhere.
Again, this stuff isn't really true. I mean, again, you
Final
say
word, Marc.
there was no other factor. there are other factors in New York besides intensified policing, like the development of ComStat, which was an information-based program
Absolutely.
which
Oh, I
allowed police
agree.
to police more effectively. No,
Yes.
no, but you said there was no other factor. I'm glad you're now agreeing with the
Well,
point that you
it's
didn't agree with
policing.
before.
No, but that's policing. That's the policing revolution that spread nationwide.
Yes,
Go ahead, Marc.
right,
Go
but the
ahead.
crime bill wasn't about. But the crime bill wasn't about a policing revolution of information. It was a policing revolution of aggressive policing, over incarceration, draconian sentencing, and racially disparate, disparate treatment of different groups. That was the issue here. And yes, we should address black people who kill black people. That's not the point. But we're not out here protesting black people who kill black people all the time, because I don't have the same expectation for the Bloods and Crips as I do for police. I expect police to not shoot me. I expect police not to be the judge, jury, and executioner on an open street. And I expect politicians to engage in humane public policy making. And that's not what has happened. And that's where Hillary Clinton must be responsible. And to, once again, not to avoid responsibility and make it look like any black person that criticizes her somehow doesn't care about safety or crime in the community is another irresponsible and dishonest move by the Clintons. And that's what I find so profoundly frustrating. But thank you for your time.
Can I just add one thing quickly, Brooke?
Quickly, Heather.
The representation of blacks in prison is due to crime rates. There is not disparate treatment in the criminal justice system. The police go where the crime is. They wish they could not need to go in those neighborhoods, but they are there to save lives, not to oppress people.
Heather McDonald and
That's
Marc Lamont Hill. Wow.
That's simply not true.
We have to leave it.
Can we
I
come back and
appreciate
talk
both
about
of you.
this one day?
We can come back. I want you here. I want you both here. Thank you both very much.
Right.
Fair.
Thank you.